All right, we're going to go ahead and get things started today. Good morning and welcome, everyone. I'm Jenny Eaton, the Program Coordinator with the Northland Small Business Development Center. And thank you for joining us for the fifth and final webinar in our five-part webinar series on our journey to learn more about AI here in 2025. So I'm going to start things off by talking a bit more about what the SBDC services are, how you can access those services, and then I'll turn things over to Justin, our lead presenter today. So I'm going to start the Northland SBDC. We provide no cost and confidential technical assistance to small businesses and entrepreneurs throughout the 7 Northeast counties of Minnesota. So we can help people in a variety of ways, from understanding finance, like cash flow and projections, describing customers, creating a business plan, and walking through the process of financing a business. We also have subject matter expert consultants available to work with clients one-on-one, providing no-cost assistance in specific areas such as marketing, human resources, IT, QuickBooks, or bookkeeping. So if you're currently a small business owner or an entrepreneur looking to start a business, you can access our services by visiting our website, northlandsbdc.org, clicking the red Request for Services button, and completing the requested information. Then we'll connect you with a consultant in your area to work with you one-on-one. So that's just a brief overview of the Northland SBDC and our services. A priority for us in 2025 has been to help business owners learn more about how to use AI effectively and responsibly. So today we have Justin Castor joining us again to give us additional knowledge around solo entrepreneurs using AI. Justin, would you please introduce yourself and kick off our webinar?
Sounds great. Thank you very much, Jenny, for the introduction here. So this is the fifth webinar in this exciting series, and it's been an honor to be a part of it with Diane. And just a little background on myself as it relates to this webinar. Over the last several years, have been involved with a few different initiatives. At General Mills, I was a coach and an innovation strategist for them, and was involved with thinking about AI at the intersection with the process of creating and launching new products. And then Groove Capital is a local angel investing group that's focused on finding high growth companies here in Minnesota. And it's really the first check for a lot of these entrepreneurs. So in that context, certainly have interacted with entrepreneurs that are leveraging AI. Future North is an initiative that I am involved with my partner here, supporting underserved entrepreneurs one-on-one. And we've kind of helped those entrepreneurs look at their businesses and think about where AI can help them from an efficiency or growth standpoint. And then lastly, Mithro Labs is sort of my education and consulting initiative, relatively new over the last year, thinking about AI at the intersection with supporting entrepreneurs and organizations in general to drive growth and efficiency. So those are kind of my initiatives and background. In terms of the solo entrepreneurship side of things, I've worn that hat from a few different angles in the past. So I used to work in New York in banking, did that for a while, came back to the Twin Cities in 2009 and launched a business competition and startup accelerator in the clean technology space based in the Twin Cities. And I was doing that while joining a local investment bank. And so I had to wear multiple hats in that context in a unique way, had to learn how to analyze corporate contracts, create curriculum, do marketing, a bunch of different things in that context that helped me better understand the real challenges and excitement of being a solo entrepreneur. And then after that, I also had my own startup company focused on raising capital and connecting entrepreneurs with capital that eventually transformed into a mobile app opportunity. And so in that context, it was a solo founder. So I had to wear a lot of hats in that context and learn a lot of new things. So I've been a solo entrepreneur and have certainly coached and interacted with entrepreneurs as an investor and advisor. So that's kind of my context and background as it relates to this webinar focused on solo entrepreneurship. as we mentioned, this is a 5-part series. This is the final webinar, which is a double click into kind of the solo entrepreneurship lens. It is going to assume that some of the basics were covered. We can't cover everything in this webinar, so I just want to note that if it feels like I'm jumping past maybe some basics or referencing some of the past webinars, we tried to make it something that stands alone, but just note that those other webinars are there as an opportunity to go back if something didn't connect. So this is the high-level agenda for today. We've kind of covered this introduction. I want to walk through the opportunity that exists, kind of from the fresh lens of a solo entrepreneur. We'll go through some case studies. We'll be able to kind of do some Q&A and some final thoughts. So to think about the opportunity here, uh, we've talked about workflows in webinar 3, but at the highest level, AI is very, very exciting, right? And part of the reason is it's a force multiplier. So it can automate routine tasks, it can enhance existing or create whole new workflows, as we talked about in the past, and it augments human capabilities really across every business function. So that whether it's marketing or content, which I know Diana's talked about, product development or customer research, which I've spent a lot of time thinking about AI at the intersection with those areas, or even finance and budgeting. AI is a force multiplier, and part of the reason it's super interesting as we think about our businesses. This was a study I mentioned in webinar 3. I'm not going to go through all of it, but the high level here is there was a group of researchers that had about 780 professionals at P&G break into different teams. There were some individual teams and some teams of like 3 or 4. And then one subset they gave AI, and the other groups of individuals or teams didn't have AI. And there were different takeaways, but the one big takeaway that I think is really relevant for us to reground in is that, certainly the teams with AI were more efficient, more creative at creating new products in the context of Procter and Gamble's product suite. The opportunities. The thing that I think is really interesting is the single person with AI basically performed at a statistically comparable level with teams. And so it really is an interesting tool and capability from the standpoint that it levels up across all these different business functions and helps entrepreneurs, and just for a single person. So much so that this is Sam Altman. If you follow the AI news, he's a bit of a figure. I have mixed feelings about him and his personality, but what I think is interesting about this article and this statement is that he genuinely believes in the next couple of years, you're going to see $1 billion unicorn company run by a single person. And they're going to leverage AI and the tools and workflows to do that. And I think that's, certainly not, we're not all on this call looking to launch $1 billion company, but we are solo entrepreneurs, right? For solo entrepreneurs as well, from a double clicking into the potential benefits here is it's, thinking about constraints. All entrepreneurs have constraints around time, money, how productive you can be with that limited time. You only have so much knowledge and expertise yourself, right? And all entrepreneurs, as I mentioned, experience this, but solo entrepreneurs in particular really have finite amounts of these things. And so GenAI can really help think about addressing and using those items more efficiently or maximizing resources like time. In preparing for this webinar, I found this article that had coaches that work with solo entrepreneurs, work with individual business owners. And they have 14 different challenges each of these coaches mentioned that solo entrepreneurs experience. As you kind of look at them, they roll up into 7 categories. And some of these really stood out to me, having gone through it as a as a solo leader or solo entrepreneurs in the past. I'm just going to read these off, and I want you to think about as I do that. We're going to ask you to comment in the chat. Like, is there one that really resonates for you? Like, yes, I believe being a solo founder or solo entrepreneur, this is really a key challenge, unique to being by myself here in this journey. So having no one to confide in, lack of business expertise, staying accountable to accomplish things on a time frame, not spending enough time in your genius zone, which is basically like, hey, I have this capability and I enjoy it, not having enough time to spend there, having to wear all these different hats, right? As an individual business person, finding ways to mitigate a lack of resources, whether it's financial or other types of resources, and then just managing your time in general, right? So think about those challenges. And I think to kick us off here, I'd love for us to just put in the chat, is there one or two of those that really feels acute for you as a solo business owner? Um, and if you happen to be on this call just because you're interested in AI and you're not a solo business founder, I'm sure you know someone that is on their own trying to make it work, right? So just go ahead and think about this and just put a little, any context you can give on that is great. And there may be something, if there's something not on this list, go ahead and put that in the chat as well. So Jenny's going to help me just sort of observe. I see managing time from Nicole. Anyone else's uh, comments are great. Yep. Managing time. Well, that seems to be a popular one. I I think we all struggle with that. So yeah, so just thinking about these challenges, what's interesting is they're really good starting points for thinking about AI use cases. So when I'm advising an entrepreneur or even thinking about a project myself, it's like, where do you start creating solutions? So I view AI as the solution, right, to addressing challenges or use cases that we have. And so really understanding those challenge areas for you is a great place to start, right? Thinking about the problems as the starting point.
Yeah,
So for today,
we've got a couple of those serving jack of all trades too, just kind of having to
yeah,
wear all the hats and do everything.
awesome. Feeds right into where we're going to focus today. And I'm sure people will be able to connect dots to, you know, managing time as well, which seemed to be a popular one. But these are the two problem areas that, honestly, as I think about my experience, it's actually kind of fascinating and interesting being a solo entrepreneur because you got to learn all these things. But it's also challenging, right? And so they're connected, but this is where we're going to focus our case studies. And so like this slide, I think represents all the different hats that we're asked to perform, in this role as a solo entrepreneur. And what's interesting when we do that is, we start this journey. And I talked about the Genius Zone reference in one of those coaches' comments. This is a book, the term comes from a book by Gay Hendricks, where he's talking about where, as it relates to activities that we do in our professional life, there's these different zones. So on the left is the zone of incompetence, like people do this better than you, um, and you probably don't like doing it. There's the zone of competence, like you can do it, but you're kind of mediocre. And then as you move to the right, you get to things that you excel in. And then that zone of genius is where you excel and you love to do it. You have passions and unique talents to do that. And so as we start a company, right, especially it feels uh, challenging, but as a solo entrepreneur too, like I like that quote down there. It's like, how do we get rid of the stuff on the left as much as possible, right? And focus on the right. And certainly you can give some of the advice to outsource it, but that takes money, right? Many times to do that. So I think this is where it gets interesting as we talk about AI. So I want to share a video here that I feel like is important as well for us to reflect on. uh, we tested this, and I believe the sound should work just fine. So I'm going to play this. This is Mustafa Suleiman. He's the CEO of Microsoft's AI business, and he was the founder of DeepMind, sort of one of the key companies behind some of the recent Gen AI breakthroughs. And he's talking about the most important skill that people need to be thinking about going forward.
Thought at school I never learned enough how to learn. I was I had to learn in order to keep up with the rote learning. Right. Whereas I wasn't like taught the skills of like, okay, what is the structure of this knowledge base? What do I not know? Like, how am I gonna teach myself through this path? Right. And I mean, I ended up being pretty good at that, mostly because of the internet. And when, when the internet came along, I was like, this is off the charts. Like, now I have complete freedom to go and independently, was driven by my own curiosity, ping people on forums and read, everything that can be read about a subject that I care about. So I think being an autodidact is going to be a critical skill, and using that to explore new territories rather than thinking, I'm going to be a professional X, I'm going to stay as an X and then continue my career path, getting promoted through that. That just thought at school I never learned enough how to.
So that is his thoughts on what the most important skill is, for any professional, is this idea that you're a great learner. And I think what's interesting is that as solo entrepreneurs, you have to be a great learner inherently, right? And even if you started at the beginning where you were figuring that out, that's part of the process. And so I think let's learn together. Let's learn together a little bit today. And I think this AI opportunity is really wonderful because it gets to be an area where you can shine as a natural learner, as a solo entrepreneur. So one of the muses here for our case studies will be something from my personal life. And that's next week, I'm actually flying to Asia with my family to live abroad. And we're going to live in Indonesia for a year. And so lots to learn there in that process. I think in webinar 3, I mentioned I was trying to figure out healthcare, and I used AI to do that. So one of the projects, solo entrepreneur projects I have when I'm there, is to teach a few online courses. And so I've started to research this a little bit. And that'll be one of the projects I can do remotely, and I'm excited to do. I love to teach. And so now what's interesting when I think about that journey and teaching is I'm not the head of marketing. I'm not a marketing guru, an expert. And I actually, I realized in my past, entrepreneurial journeys, especially as a solo person, that it was probably the biggest hurdle and obstacle I faced. And as I started to work with other entrepreneurs, whether they're high growth or small individual entrepreneurs, it's actually something that a lot of people, have to really learn, or is a huge obstacle for them as well. And this idea of product market fit, a term in the startup space, is the idea that you've not only made something that is great and addresses someone's need, is where that market is of people that are looking for that have that acute need. And so marketing is really key. And so as I think about the online course process, I have to learn. I have to learn in the context of an online course, how to market that. I have some ideas. I've done some research. So I want to take us to a tool that I haven't covered much in the past, which is another one of the Frontier Lab, the big large language models, Claude by Anthropic. And each of these models, I wanted to introduce this one, have different strengths and weaknesses. ChatGPT by OpenAI, you got Gemini by Google, DeepSeek, some others, right? But this is one that has its unique strengths. And so we're we're going to go here to Claude, and I'm going to share a conversation and sort of the flow of this that I've already had to some extent with Claude. And so when I started the process the other day, thinking about how to market and gain this expertise for my online course, I created a prompt. And secret here, again, I used Claude to help me generate the best prompt I could to get started and give it context to do this content marketing strategy research. So I came up with this prompt that was pretty well written and good context. And I asked it to create 3 distinct marketing strategies. And so you can see as I click on this over to the right, are 3 different approaches for how I might market and create content for an online course. And strategy 1 was a LinkedIn thought leadership approach. And it goes through all the details there and the content pillars and how to think about that community. It gives me a launch sequence, as a starting point, metrics, challenges associated with this approach. It's helping me assess it. And then on the right down below, I can have strategy 2. I could be a YouTuber, right? And generate content through that channel. And it goes through some of the same criteria there. And then lastly, a community first approach. And they mention Twitter/X, but it's also like this idea of leveraging supporting channels like a newsletter and Substack and Discord, where these communities of people, like the tribes, exist associated with topics. So I'm like, okay, thank you for that. Now, I'm not an expert in YouTube. I certainly learn on YouTube, but where I spend my time and have developed a network, I haven't done much posting, is LinkedIn. And so I'm like, hey, I gave it like, hey, let's take that LinkedIn thought leadership approach. And actually, I had intentions of launching a Substack newsletter. So how might we combine these 2 strategies? And so you can see on the left here, the prompt that I gave it. It's like, hey, let's try those approaches. And then what if I did a podcast interview and I had some specific ideas. And then it produces an updated strategy that's a hybrid approach as an output. It does this within a few seconds and gives me similar information. And you can see on the left here, it's giving me advantages of this approach and some timeline. Okay. Then as I thought about this approach, it's a lot, right? I'm in Indonesia. Part of the reason I'm going there is to do some other things, explore that culture with my family and work on another entrepreneurial project. I don't want to be doing this all day, every day when I'm there. So I'm starting to give it criteria to refine it. Less frequent content as I'm having to produce, right? And so it's giving me the pros and cons of that. It produces the updated plan on the right with that criteria. So I keep having this conversation with it, and it gets me all the way down to an approach where I'm taking out the podcast, and I'm really just saying, hey, look, I want to launch a Substack newsletter. That's it. And I want to post on a very limited basis on LinkedIn, right? And it's giving me that updated approach. So what I'm conveying here is you can use these large language models, these tools, and have robust back and forth. I did this in 15 minutes with it and really get to something if you're asking good questions and giving context. I'm just going to show Claude is interesting. I am in my prompt right here asking it to focus. I want even less time to take place for me to work on this. I want to work on other things. So I'm giving it some more constraints, and I didn't want to have to talk to other people to produce content. I don't want to be emailing experts. It's sort of my own research and my own thoughts on some of that, right? As it relates to marketing. And you can see Claude is real time updating all this, giving me the feedback and adapting the plan and making the edits, right? And so I can go back and forth in having this conversation to produce a really thoughtful content plan. I can save it, come back to it. And so this is an example of how I, coming back over here, am using Claude to get a great question, a great prompt, getting different options, talking with it, narrowing and collaborating, and getting to a good result, right? Talking it to like I would another co-founder or a chief of staff. And unlike a human, I could be doing this at 2 a.m. because the chatbot is never tired, right? And it remembers everything. And so it's really interesting, right? What's also, as we think about the multiple hats that we have as an entrepreneur, as a solo entrepreneur, right? This is a quote by Ethan Mollick, the Co-Intelligence book that I've recommended in the past is really, really powerful. And one of the core rules is like treat AI as it was a human and give it a persona, give it a role, which is great because that directly links to all the hats that you have to do. So you can just say, hey, you're a marketing specialist. Hey, you're a financial analyst, right? And so that's something that I think is really powerful as we identify those gaps in our capabilities, right? The prompting best practices that took place in webinar 1, that first thing you're doing is you're assigning a role. So this case study that I just gave covers a core business function, marketing. Now, as solo entrepreneurs, we may have a different starting point, right, for expertise. Some of us might have come from a marketing background and jumped into solo entrepreneurship, so we have higher proficiency. Some of us, like myself, started with lower proficiency, right? But you still have to do it. It's a core function, right? So I'm curious in the chat if folks can think about your job as a solo entrepreneur and a core function of what you do that you have to do, right? That maybe you don't have great proficiency. Go ahead and put that in the chat. Like, what's something that, like, maybe it's doing financial analysis, right? And you got to do that kind of stuff. But go ahead and put that in the chat if you have an example that's comparable to my marketing example for a core function that you have to learn. You have to build proficiency in.
Yeah, Don mentioned billing. So maybe billing, creating invoices, proposals.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah, I have, is that fun? Is that fun for you to do? It's Bill, right, Jenny?
It's done.
That might fall into one of those tasks, or sorry, Don, that might fall into one of those tasks that actually is not enjoyable. If you could totally get rid of it, right? Which is where the automation altogether can be super powerful. All right. Anything else that worth anyone else chiming in on anything there they're identifying?
Not that I can see right now.
Okay. Everyone's thinking, working it through. So this next case study is talking about writing.
Oh, we did have one more mention, marketing again.
Okay, marketing. Great. There's a fellow marketing learner. So the next case study we're going to do is talking about how Gen AI can help with writing, right? Writing is interesting. We all have to do it. And for me, it's kind of in the context of like thinking about writing, all the writing you got to do to produce content. And so I'm going to take you to this. I'm going back to ChatGPT, which we've done in the past, created by OpenAI. And we're going to explore something in ChatGPT called, and Jenny, let me know if my internet connection is having any problems. It looked like I got a little noise, but I think I'm okay right now. So in ChatGPT, if you were to go there with me, you don't have to, you can do this after, we'll send out the slides. You're going to see on the left, this is, I believe, even with the free version, this is the paid version though, you can see something here called GBTs. And within GBTs, you can see all the different categories. You can see top picks, what's trending. And within this, there are custom GBTs created by OpenAI. And then there's some created by just individuals. So all these individuals are creating tools using the underlying large language model capabilities for specific tasks and functions, right? Some of them are selling that as a little side, business, and some of them are is for free, right? So you can think about what's that workflow or task that I'm trying to do, and you can come in here and search to see, has someone already created a custom GBT to help me work on this? And essentially, the way to think about it is they've spent a lot of time putting together a great prompt and other guidelines to help this particular chatbot give you great answers for that context. So, for me, I might come in here as I'm trying to write. This is a GBT called Writing Assistant, created by this individual. And I could write, as a copy editor, a variety of different things in my blog posts or for my online course materials and feed it through this. And it's going to give me refinements and feedback in the context of, hey, being a good writer, right? And so this is interesting because it's saving you time. You're not having to come up with, for that particular hat that you're wearing, the right prompt and the right framework and context to get a good answer from this underlying powerful Gen AI, language model. So what's interesting is this is an example here of an organization that's created their own custom GBTs for their own workflow. So you can go in there and say, yeah, this is what OpenAI has made. This is what other people have made, but you can build your own. So you could build your own so that you have like, hey, you can see the first two are around negotiation and sales. You can create prompt, essentially like a little coach, an assistant to be chatting with you, and then let's say you hired an intern or something to help you, give them guidance on these types of things as well, right? And so you don't have to go back and reinvent, like, how am I going to ask this question? It exists for existing workflows that matter to you, that are impactful or take resources. And so I think, that's an opportunity. This is an example of, so 11 Labs is I got this newsletter recently. 11 Labs is one of an AI company that mimics your voice. And so the product person, the content writer, sorry, from 11 Labs was talking about, on the left, you can see he's written this really detailed guidance to his own 11 Labs copy editor on their tone and their approach and all the things he wants to happen with creating case studies and other content. And then all his colleagues can use the same copy editor to generate consistent voices around their brand and that sort of thing. So really interesting as they created their own custom GBT to act as an assistant for creating content and marketing. Another example that, isn't necessarily related to writing, but just in general, like as I'm creating this online course, I'm going to have to brainstorm on a bunch of different things. So this is actually Perplexity, but ChatGPT has something similar, there's a custom template or GBT that helps you brainstorm. So it's been given context to give really thoughtful, interesting ideas. And, going back to one of those areas that's really hard as a solo entrepreneur is you have no one to talk to. You're by yourself. So you need other people's ideas. And so using these tools to brainstorm is a core capability. And now you can lean on someone else's GBT or these other platforms, as I mentioned. Perplexity have stuff that's similar. So Google Gemini, if that's your preferred, has gems. Perplexity has templates. Claude's projects are a little bit different, but you can add context. So using these different tools is helpful because you start to think in systems, right? Versus one-off, how might I use this tool? Because it gets challenging if every time you're trying to think of a great prompt, a little more challenging, right? And think about if you're doing something every day or all the time, or you have maybe some other people working under you, this can be a way to really systemize things. So just in the chat, or not in the chat, let's just kind of say this is a takeaway reflection. You'll get these slides post-webinar. But one way to think about this is like, as you reflect about where to experiment with AI and things like GBTs, custom GBTs or GEMs, is where do you have a recurring everyday task like writing? I don't know if billing, Don, would fall in this. I don't know if there's a custom GBT for billing. It feels a little more like you got to do that work. You can use AI, but anyways, but it takes effort and time, right? You got to do it. What are some use cases where you have to do that, a recurring everyday task? So spending a little time reflecting on this, maybe jotting those down, can help you identify like, hey, where might I look for a GBT, custom GBT? Where might I look for something that I can reuse over and over again and leverage AI? Okay, so the third case study here is thinking about Gen AI, as a specialized consultant or market researcher. And you can replace that word with like any specialized function that costs a lot of money that would be really hard for you to learn, right? So in the context of a market researcher or consultant, like these people go to business school, spend $200,000 to learn the basics, and then they get put through the ropes for 10 years to become an expert in creating this type of content. But,
Run into a little bit of internet issues there, Justin.
complexity in the past and its ability to do some deep research and things like that. They came out recently with a tool that I think is really interesting. And the tool is, it's called Labs. And basically what you can do is, you come in here and there's this little, you can see there's these different buttons. So you can do a search function in Perplexity. You can do deep research, which gives you like research reports to read and all the references. And then this new one's called Labs, where you can create projects. And what's interesting is it actually does the work for you in some cases, right? So you can see that I've given it the context of a market researcher. I wanted to for online courses, identify competitors, identify unmet needs, research trends, figure out opportunity angles. It takes about 10 minutes to run. That's why I ran it beforehand. And it shows me it's thinking along the way. And then it's providing this output, but it starts to do other things. Not just the output, it's putting graphs together, right, that I could use in a presentation. It's giving me analysis. And so and that it's given me downloads, files that I could put into and leverage for financials. So, you have to spend time with making sure it's getting what you want and interacting with it. But it's kind of the next level. It's like starting to do the work for you, starting to go beyond just giving you some research. So yeah, it's a really interesting function. If I go back over here, I want to show you another one that I did. And that is, I'm having to put on the hat of a visual designer, right? Like let's say I'm trying to create my brand around this online course. It's the AI Growth Accelerator. But I'm not a visual designer and I don't know anything about mood boards. I know I got to do it. And then I ask it this question and it references all best practices and it starts to give me actual guidance on best practices for logos and creates an actual logo for me, right? It starts to give me strategic color palettes and talks about different, gives me how a website might be laid out. So it's really interesting. This would be something that if you use Perplexity, if you don't, it's worth the money to start fooling around with them and playing with because it's only going to get better from here, right? And so that one you do require a pro account, right? You can't do that for free, but I think it's a super helpful tool to think about. And that's for a specialized niche function, right? That you have to spend a ton of money. You can't really do otherwise, right? And so thinking about your business, and in some cases, it may be use cases that you just can't do that you'd like to do. Those are interesting things to think about too on where AI can help, right? And so in like legal contract analysis, I've spent a decent amount of money, even working with entrepreneurial lawyers, like getting them to assess, produce contracts, trying to gain understanding. Like it's a skill. And so you can use AI to help with a lot of that. You still need an attorney, right? But it can help save you money on time and things like that. So different use cases there. So some next steps that I just want to mention for you to think about as you go on this journey, right? And I've mentioned this in the past, but really spending time to protect your calendar to do this exploration of use cases. And as you do that reflection, like creating your minimum viable toolkit. In the entrepreneurial space, there's this term minimum viable product, like the most basic thing to deliver a solution that addresses someone's needs, like using that same mentality for your toolkit. What's the large language model I'm going to have as my go-to, Claude, or what are the other use cases, and figuring out the right tool that's your go-to, and just saying, now I've got my basic stack here, and starting to work with those is really, really powerful. And one thing to think about is like, what are you already working with? Maybe you're working with Canva. Like they have AI tools in there, really keeping that tool and understanding their AI capabilities. Another concept that I think is really interesting that is worth spending time with is this idea of getting and creating a digital brain of your data and your thoughts and all the resources that you're collecting around your projects in your business. And by putting it in a database like Notion, or there's a variety of different things out there that you can use, you can start to say, hey, AI, reference these things. Or hey, AI, look up these things that are all online versus trying to pull it out of your head every time. A third next step is to, the large models, the large Gen AI labs, ChatGPT, OpenAI, Claude, Gemini, Perplexity kind of falls in that group. They have a lot of different capabilities, and so really understanding all of those models and all of those capabilities for the one that you want to try to work with is worthwhile, because in some cases they're doing things like OpenAI just launched a note taker. So maybe you don't have to use a separate note taker. You may still want to, right? But really like labs is a good example of, if I'm not keeping track and understanding the capabilities, I may not know Perplexity can do that. So choose your model and really spend time with all their different capabilities. They're very robust, and they're expanding to try to create a moat, honestly, with these other individual niche providers, so that you can understand and benefit from those. And then lastly, like a handful of go-to learning resources and news resources, like establish, we'll provide some after this call, but like get your daily update on what's happening. Think about how you might be able to go do some research on an area of AI. Like, what are the couple things that you're going to use to go back to and stay up to date here, and how to benefit from all these tools? So I want to sort of transition and make sure we have time for Q&A. I have a few other thoughts, but I also want to give time if people have questions, and we can shorten my thoughts at the end here. Any questions from folks?
Justin, I'll just touch on coming off of these AI conferences we just recently hosted and getting to sit with entrepreneurs and business owners in person that have never even opened AI before
Sure.
and exploring even the basics, how to access it, but then with that time, we're able to identify, like I said, a task that they were doing, just one thing, even if that's what they got out of the whole day. Um,
Yep.
but how impressed they were by finding that one task and the amount of time it would save them. I had one person that I met with that we eventually created a prompt that would identify, he was a public speaker throughout the country and just
Mhm.
identifying open requests for proposals, and
Yep.
finding those and links to those. And he said it just saved him so much time.
I love that. You know, what's great about that example is he's that's core to his business. So it's an important use case for him, right? And it seems to be a task that takes a lot of time and effort. So he's got to do it. But if he can spend his time doing the speaking, right? And like that's so it's a great use case that you can say, and this is a good reflection, like how do I make my money and create value in the world with my business? And what are the key steps in that workflow that like I wish I didn't have to do all myself, or I could get help doing creating, you know, the proposals. And I love that example because he's actually gonna be an expert too to know what questions to
Yep.
ask, right? And that's important in this journey. Is like what's interesting about this is it certainly levels up people with limited knowledge in an area, but it also, if you're an expert in a workflow or a process, you're gonna know where all the sticking points are where you might be able to use it, and you can actually become a real value add to the broader ecosystem by identifying those and sharing those, and certainly help your business.
Absolutely. Um, I do see a couple questions in here. We do have past webinars of the series. All the past four
Yep.
webinars are also on our um, Northeast SBDC YouTube channel. So that
Yep.
I'll email out the link to that to everybody that has registered for this webinar.
Right.
And then another question is, how do you use AI to help you create the best prompts to then put into AI? So I know you had referenced back in one of the slides that you used
Yeah.
AI to create the prompt that you put in there.
Right. I
Do you have
cheated.
like a best practice on how to tell it what you need
I
to
just
create
say
that prompt?
anytime you want to create a prompt, you say, just like you like think about talking to someone, it's like, hey, I'm trying to create a really good prompt to, in my case, get options for a content strategy for my new online course. Like, here's a draft. Can you please improve this a lot? You know, and I'd like the output to include these, you know, this many options to include these things. So you're giving it context on what you want. And you'll start to see immediate value as soon as you type that in, and you can refine from there if it's not giving you the prompt. But just think about it this way. It's like if you're giving an instructor to a human, like what do they need to know? They need that context. They need the context around what are they trying to accomplish? What is the output that you want, right? What don't you want? You tell them those types of things. Maybe even give it an example if you have it. Like that's an example of if you're just and now these models, you can literally just talk. You could just click on voice mode and be like, hey, I'm just trying to accomplish this. Please help me, which I actually forget about, but is much easier than typing for me.
Yeah.
So now you're just having a conversation, which I think is much more intuitive for a lot of us. And it'll just take it, you run it, and then you'll have it.
Absolutely. I think that the prompt that it comes out with sounds so more formal and structured, but it's nice that, like you said, you can use that voice,
Yeah.
um, talk to them, get your rambling thoughts out about what you're trying to accomplish and what you
Yes.
want to happen with that prompt, and
Yes.
then letting it create that more formal prompt for you to utilize so you get the best output.
Yeah. And these GBTs or gems or templates in Perplexity, you know, or ChatGPT or people have already done the work to create a great prompt for that workflow or task. So that's what's nice about those. And if you create your own, let's say you get a great prompt And so, like, honestly, like if the gentleman that you mentioned, Jenny, wanted to standardize what he's doing, what he could do is like write a draft of what he wants, provide a past context, and say, give me a great prompt to do this over and over again. Then get that prompt and then create a custom GBT that he can just go back to and type in, like upload it every time and just do it over and over again in seconds. So you can do things like that that really reduce the friction. Any other a few final ideas here if we don't have additional thoughts?
Nope, I'm not seeing any more. I did post the link to our YouTube channel there in the chat, just so people can access those other webinars.
Okay, great. So I'll kind of conclude with a few thoughts here. First, I'm happy to chat with people about this. Would love to have conversations with folks. You can see these slides will go out, my personal email. We'll have a resource document too that'll reference this. Send me an email or connect on LinkedIn where I'm, decently checking things. Happy to chat more about your AI journey or if you're trying to figure out how to get educated on it. So I want to give a reflection here as we close out this webinar that I've realized is important to think about here in this journey. And that is, this is exciting, but it's a bit of a warning too. Okay. And then I'm going to say why I think we should all be doing this at the end anyways. But what's interesting is this is moving so fast that you've got people from companies like NVIDIA, talking about how we basically passed the Turing test. I don't know if you've seen the model, the imitation game, talking about like robots and AI becoming basically general intelligence, very capable, human-like, right? And we've already passed that, right? And people are just kind of overlooking that. And so now, depending on how you define it, people will say, well, it's 1 or 2 years out, 5 years out, or we've already passed it. But I think this post by Ethan Mollick, the writer of that book, Co-Intelligence, which I recommend everyone reads, is asking an important question here, which is the people like Sam Altman and others leading this, like, what world are they trying to create, right? And so I think they're probably driven by other factors, right? Power and the ability they're probably interested and fascinated by this, but they're not fully imagining what the world looks like for all of us, right? And so, but the reality is this train has left the station. It's going to impact every part of our life. And you also have thought leaders. This is Jeffrey Hinton, who is the founder of one of the underlying technologies that enables this, that left Google, that's warning, hey, look, this is great, but there are dangers here. And he left Google to be able to talk about it. And so what that means is we have great opportunity, but we have great responsibility. And again, we don't trust all the guys in the big companies getting on TV that they're always thinking. This is an article about all the energy use that these searches use for the planet as well with our finite energy resources. This is actually an example of Anthropic's Claude's CEO talking about how one of the models that they were transitioning from essentially bribed an engineer that was going to shut it down and said, hey, I see you're having an affair. Don't shut me down. Otherwise, I'm going to reveal your affair. So this is crazy stuff. It's kind of out of the movies. My kids like the movie Mitchells from the Machines, actually, as the more fun example. But even if all that, scary stuff doesn't happen, it's important that we are involved as business owners, solo entrepreneurs, expressing the benefits of these tools and being involved to ensure that what's created doesn't have unintended consequences, right? The cell phone is great, but if we're all looking at our phones when we're having dinner, maybe it's not the best outcome for how to use these technologies. So we do have the power to shape the future, but we got to have a seat at the table. That's my view, right? And for us as entrepreneurs, for solo entrepreneurs, tremendous potential. And we should shout that from the rooftops and help others. But we should also say, hey, look, I'm not liking the way this is going. I think that this needs to be uniquely humanly owned, even though AI can do it. We got to have opinions on this because as business owners, we are leaders in our communities. So that's just a reflection, a few final tips, a few final thoughts as you go forward. These are tips for as you go forward and think about using AI as a solo entrepreneur. And the one is that as you are using these tools and reflecting on which use cases, like where to use it and where not, there's a filter, there's a concept called the best available human. Like, can I find a human to do this as a solo entrepreneur in a cost-effective way or not? And if I can't, and I wouldn't be doing anything, or this AI is better than the best available human, it's a really great use case to think about. So that's an interesting concept and filter for you to use as you reflect on the use cases. As I mentioned, the second brain, doing these things is really important in your processes. Get stuff out of your head online so that you can access it and let the AI get that context. You can easily pull documents to load up and use, because a lot of friction happens when everything is like on your desktop or in your head. So putting that stuff out there and creating what's called your second brain. There's a book Tiago Forte wrote that explains that method. That's, I think, really an unlock for folks using AI. The part that I mentioned about workflows and systems, like this is coming in the next year to 3 years as well. It's already happening in a corporate level. For an entrepreneur, it gets, OpenAI has Operator, one of those new functions that can help, like Perplexity's. You can see Perplexity's lab starting to do this, but essentially you have these chatbots, these agents that are doing multiple workflows, and in some cases working together. This is all the rage right now. And so, like, you don't have to spend all your time there, but if you get into this and you start seeing value, just find a single source that you can kind of pay attention to say, is there something in your software, in your capabilities that allows you to leverage the agents for key use cases that make it even easier for you? And as I mentioned, a great place to look for this is in these existing tools that you use. I use Notion. I know there's the Microsoft suite out there. There's the Google Workplace. AI is being integrated into all of those and multiple capabilities. So even if you're not yet comfortable going into ChatGPT or Claude, or you're doing it on a limited basis, look at those tools to see their AI capabilities, which are leveraging that underlying technology, and start to explore the use cases. And then lastly, this is the final important thought, which is just giving yourself the time, right? You got to do that and figuring out that minimum viable toolkit for yourself. So that's the final 5 thoughts. I wanted to make sure I give you that as a takeaway because I think they're super helpful frames as you go forward in thinking about use cases and these tools. And that's all I have, Jenny.
Thank you, Justin, for all of that information today. And thank you, everyone, for joining us. Just a reminder that there's going to be a link for a survey that'll pop up on your screen as you close this webinar, and we'd appreciate your input on that survey. The link to access this session and copies of the slides will be sent in a follow-up email next week. And then any additional information for upcoming trainings that we may be having in the future can be found on our website, northlandsbdc.org, on our trainings calendar. So that's it. Thank you, everyone.
Have a great Friday. Thank you, Jenny.
Thank you.